Hi all and welcome to the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams and this is an extra must listen to show called From Russia with Love +3 and the Dutch Connection. Time to do some clog dancing on the deep state of the Dutch. Hi all, and this is our third in our series called From Russia with Love Plus, and it expands on information contained within our series 1 through 8C and goes into wider aspects on certain topics of information within each episode. Well, tonight we focus on a country rarely mentioned as a powerhouse within the alt media circles, and yet played a dominant role in the world of the past, and a largely hidden from view in the recent past and currently also. That country is Holland, or is now known as the Netherlands, and part of the what was essentially an organised piracy group called the Dutch East or West Indies Group that went on a global escapades, raping, pillaging and killing many of the native occupants of lands they took over, the most prominent being New Zealand, India and Africa, amongst some others. The latter particularly prominent with the De Beers group out of Holland. And then you have the people there known as the Afrikaans. They are all Dutch descendants. But that group was heavily involved with trafficking, harvesting and slavery in the past, although the term Dutch neglects the frequent hidden hand of the people known as Jews. The slavery ships under the banner of the Dutch were all Jewish owned, as we covered in part 4. And this has often been the case, particularly in the past 100 years or so, that certain countries and people get labelled as pariahs, dictators, rogue nations, and yet, as our series has shown, the common denominator with all these rogue enterprises always has Jewish people at or near the top of them. That is not to denigrate all Jews, no more than you would denigrate the Dutch people for their empire, the British for their empire, or the Romans for their empire, or the modern-day version of global skullduggery, the Americans. All peoples, all countries have been used, abused and lied to on a massive scale, and all have been used as pawns in a larger game too few see, and even less comprehend the scope of it. All music tonight is Dutch-based bands with some surprises. We'll be back shortly. Hi all and welcome to the show. That was Hocus Pocus, and there's been an awful lot of hocus pocus going on between the Dutch and many other countries, which we'll cover in fairly extensive aspects tonight. So we're going to start with the Dutch takeover of America. New Amsterdam was a 17th century Dutch settlement established at the southern tip of Manhattan Island, and that served as the seat of the colonial government in what was known as the New Netherland. Now, the factory became a settlement outside of Fort Amsterdam, and the fort was situated on the strategic southern tip of the island of Manhattan and was meant to defend the fair trade operations of the Dutch West India Company in the North River, which is now known as the Hudson River. Now, in 1624, it became a provincial extension of the Dutch Republic and was designated as the capital province in 1625. By 1655, the population of New Netherland had grown to 2,000 people, with 1,500 living in New Amsterdam. By 1664, the population of New Netherlands had skyrocketed to almost 9,000 people, 2,500 of which lived in New Amsterdam and 1,000 lived near Fort Orange, and the remainder in other towns and villages. Now, the term orange crops up in several countries involving the Dutch, but also their soccer shirts are orange, and we will reveal later as to why. It also explains why the company ING is in orange. ING means the International Netherlands Group is why. In 1664, the English took over New Amsterdam and renamed it New York City after the Duke of York, later known as James II and James VII. After the Second Anglo-Dutch War of 1665 through 67, England and the United Provinces of the Netherlands agreed to the status quo in the Treaty of Breda. Now, the English, which is the Crown, and no, it's not related in any way to British royalty, kept the island of Manhattan, the Dutch giving up their claim to the town and the rest of the colony, while the English formally abandoned Suriname in South America and the island of Run in the East Indies to the Dutch, confirming their control of the valuable Spice Islands. So today, much of what was once New Amsterdam is now in New York City. In 1524, nearly a century before the arrival of the Dutch, the site that later became New Amsterdam was named New Angelmeem by the Italian explorer Giovanni di Verrazzano to commemorate his patron king Francis I of France, who was the former Count of Angoulême. Now, the first recorded exploration by the Dutch of the area around what is now called New York Bay was in 1609 with the voyage of the ship Half Main, which means half moon. Oh my. Commanded by Henry Hudson in the service of the Dutch Republic as the emissary of Maurice of Nassau, Prince of Orange and Holland's stadholder. And Hudson named the river the Mauritius River. Now, he was covertly attempting to find the Northwest Passage for the Dutch East India Company. Instead, he brought back news about the possibility of exploitation of beaver by the Dutch, who sent commercial private missions to the area the following years. Now, at that time, beaver pelts were highly prized in Europe because the fur could be felted to make waterproof hats. And a byproduct of the trade in beaver pelts was castoreum, which is the secretion of the animal's anal glands, which was then used for medicinal purposes and also for perfumes. Boggles the mind. A bit like the musk scent from the musk rat. The Astor family, bloodline family, made most of their early fortune from this trade, but they introduced and were connected to another Dutch family, the Roosevelts. That family was later to have two presidents and a first lady. They were also connected to another famous family named the Stuyvesants, and the expeditions by Adrian Block and Hendrik Christiansen in 1611, 1612, 13 and 14 resulted in the surveying and charting of the region from the 38th parallel to the 45th parallel. Now on the 1614 map, which gave them a 4-year trade monopoly, 4-year loop, under a patent of the States General, they named the newly discovered and mapped territory New Netherland for the first time. It also showed the first year-round trading presence in New Netherland, Fort Nassau, which would be replaced in 1624 by Fort Orange, which eventually grew into the town of Beverwyck, which is now Albany. The Dominican trader Juan Rodriguez, rendered in Dutch as Jan Rodriguez, was born in Santo Domingo of Portuguese and African descent, arrived on Manhattan Island during the winter of 1613 and 14, trapping for pelts and trading with the local population as a representative of the Dutch. And he was the first recorded non-Native American inhabitant of what would eventually become New York City. The territory of New Netherland was originally a private, profit-making commercial enterprise focused on cementing alliances and conducting trade with the diverse Native American ethnic groups. That didn't turn out too well. It never does. Surveying and exploration of the region was conducted as a prelude to an anticipated official settlement by the Dutch Republic, which occurred in 1624. In 1620, the Pilgrims attempted to sail to the Hudson River from England. However, the Mayflower reached Cape Cod, now part of Massachusetts, on November the 9th, 1620, after a voyage of 64 days. And for a variety of reasons, primarily a shortage of supplies, the Mayflower could not proceed to the Hudson River, and the colonists decided to settle near Cape Cod and establishing the Plymouth colony. But the Dutch returned, Governor Island. The mouth of the Hudson River was selected as the ideal place for the initial settlement, as it had easy access to the ocean, while also securing an ice-free lifeline to the beaver trading post near present-day Albany. And it was here that Native American hunters supplied them with pelts in exchange for European-made trade goods, and wampum, which was soon being made by the Dutch on Long Island. Now, wampum is a string of beads of various aquatic shells, which the natives used as currency and also jewellery at that time. In 1621, the Dutch West India Company was founded, 60 years before the British equivalent. Between 1621 and 1623, orders were given to the private commercial traders to vacate the territory, thus opening up the territory to Dutch settlers and company traders. And it also allowed the laws and ordinances of the States of Holland to apply. Previously, during the private commercial period, only the law of the ship had applied. The law of the ship became the law of the land, known as maritime law. Could this be the first ever enactment of that law? In 1624, the first settlers in New Netherland arrived on Noten Eiland, Nut or Nutten Island, now known as Governor's Island. aboard the ship New Netherland under the command of Cornelius Jacobson May, who disembarked on the island with 30 families to take legal possession of the New Netherland territory. Now, the families were then dispersed to Fort Wilhelmus on Verhulsten Island, which is now Burlington Island, in the South River, now the Delaware River, to Kiev Itchok, or now Old Saybrook, which is Connecticut, at the mouth of the Verse River, now the Connecticut River, and further north at North Nassau on the Mauritius or North River, now known as the Hudson River, what is now Albany. A fort and sawmill was soon erected at Nut Island. The latter was constructed by Francois Fezard and was taken apart for iron in 1648. New Amsterdam received municipal rights on February the 2nd, 1653, thus becoming a city. Albany, then named Beverwyck, received its city rights in 1652. New Harlem, now known as Harlem, was formally recognised in 1658. But no one asks, who gave them the rights to the city or the land? The answer is likely the Crown agents. Many Native Americans will state that America was their land. And under legal law, that is correct. But who gave anyone or any people the right to own the land above all others? And you've got to ask the question, is ownership anywhere on the planet outside of the Mother Earth something that should be subscribed to? Ownership of land that doesn't belong to any individuals, it belongs to us all, and charging people to live on their own planet is on a soul development level retarded, and it's child level thinking. The first Jewish known to have lived in New Amsterdam arrived in 1654. And before we go forward with this part, people may ask, why is the mention of Jews being interjected with the story of Holland? Well, surprisingly or not, it is not interjected, as it is not a separate story, and it has been repeated in many other countries, namely Russia in the 1910s, Germany in the 1940s, and America ever since. Now, the first Jewish to arrive were Solomon Peterson and Jacob Bar Simpson, who sailed during the summer of 1654 directly from Holland with passports that gave them permission to trade in the colony. Then in early September, 23 Jewish refugees arrived from the formerly Dutch city of Recife, which had been conquered by the Portuguese in January of 1654. Now, the director of New Amsterdam, Peter Stuyvesant, sought to turn them away, but was ultimately overruled by the directors of the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam. Why? Because the East and West Indies companies and ships were all ran and operated by Jewish owners is why. Now, one of the first refugees was Asa Levy, an Ashkenazi Jew who was one of the first 23 refugees who eventually prospered and in 1661 became the first Jew to own a house in New Amsterdam, which also made him the first Jew known to have owned a house anywhere in North America. And here is some interesting details about who Asa Levi was. And given it was the Jewish who first imposed taxes on the people, is it a coincidence that imposing taxes on the people, something the Jewish traders who ran the Silk Road never paid, is called a levy? Is it a levy or a Levi tax? Asa Levi was probably, it said, born in Vilna, which is present-day Lithuania. He left Poland for Amsterdam, possibly to escape the pogroms of Khmelnytsky uprising. Although he lived for a time in Amsterdam, he was not given burger, not a hamburger, burger spelt with a G, H in the middle, which is citizen rights, and was probably not granted porter, P-O-O-R-T-E-R, which means permanent residency rights either. It is said he lived for a time in Schwelm, a town in the county of Mark in modern-day Germany. Two archived documents from Amsterdam revealed that on April 26, 1660, he was there seeking a payment of debt owed to him, and on May 24, 1660, he announced he was going to Germany. Levi married his wife Miriam, whose maiden name was Israel, while living in Amsterdam. Now, that cannot be verified, as no record of this marriage exists in the Amsterdam archives, but it said this might be due to the fact that Jews were not required to register their marriages in Amsterdam until 1695. Now, while in Amsterdam, he learned about the opportunities in the New World and migrated there. Now, Levi, as I said, might have initially moved to Dutch Brazil, and he has been mentioned as one of the 23 Jewish refugees who fled from Recife at the end of the Dutch rule in that area. However, Levi is not listed in the extant congressional minute books of the Brazilian Jewish community, which casts serious doubts on this theory. But it is known that he eventually ended up in New Netherlands, possibly arrived in New Amsterdam aboard the St. Catherine or St. Charles in early September 1654. In 1655, Peter Stuyvesant, the governor of the colony, was ordered to attack New Sweden and the Swedish colony on the Delaware River, and accordingly issued orders for the enlistment of all adults. Now, several Jews, among them Asa Levi, appeared to have been ready to serve, but the governor and council passed an ordinance that Jews cannot be permitted to serve as soldiers, but shall instead pay a monthly contribution for the exemption. Levi and his comrades at once refused to pay, and on November the 5th, 1655, petitioned for leave to stand guard like other burghers or to be relieved from the tax. Now, the petition was rejected with the comment that if the petitioners were not satisfied with the law, they might choose to go elsewhere. But Levi successfully appealed to Holland and was subsequently permitted to do guard duty like other citizens. Levi appears also as a prominent trader in Fort Orange, present-day Albany. And it was likely that it was him that was responsible for the rebuke given to Stuyvesant by the directors in Holland during the same year because of his refusal to permit Jews to trade there. Oops. Levy was also one of the first licensed butchers in the colony. In 1657, the burger right was essentially made essential for certain trading privileges, and within 2 days of a notice to that effect, Asa Levy appeared in court requesting to be admitted as a burger, which is citizen rights. Now, the officials expressed their surprise at such a request at the time, and the record reads, the Jew claims that such ought not to be refused to him, as he keeps watch and ward like other burghers, and showing a burgher's certificate from the city of Amsterdam that the Jew is a burgher there, which he wasn't originally. Now, the application was denied, but Levy at once brought the matter before Stuyvesant and the council, which, mindful of the previous experience, ordered that Jews should be admitted as burghers on April 21st, 1657. Mr. Levy was the first Jew to own a house in North America. As early as 1661, he purchased real estate in Fort Orange, and he was also the earliest Jew owner of real estate in New York, and his transactions there commencing in June 1662 with the purchase of land on South William Street. Within 10 years of his arrival, Levy had become a man of consequence. And when, in 1664, the wealthiest inhabitants were summoned to lend the city money for fortifications against the English, he was the only Jew among them, and lent the city 100 florins. It is as a litigant, however, that Levy figures most prominently in the Dutch records, and his name often appearing for days in succession. He invariably argued his own case and was almost invariably successful. Only on 2 or 3 occasions did he figure as a defendant. But as a litigant, he is also named in the records of Gravesend, Brooklyn, in 1674. Levy's trading relations extended to New England, and he frequently appeared as an attorney for merchants in Holland also. In 1671, he lent the money for building the first Lutheran church in New York. Now, one may ask, why would a Jew build a Lutheran church and not a place of worship for Jews? The answer is all the separate religions link back to the Jewish religion of law, via the Talmud and the Torah is why. About 1678, he built a slaughterhouse in the east end of what is now known as Wall Street, where he appears to have been the owner of a famous tavern. Wall Street retained its slaughterhouse beginnings, it seems, in a different form these days. So instead of being unpopular on account of his many lawsuits, the contrary seems to have been the case with Mr. Levy, and the confidence reposed in his honesty by his Christian fellow citizens appears frequently from the court records. Property in litigation was put into his custody, and he was also named as executor in the wills of Christian merchants. They never miss a trick, do they? And figures as both administrator and trustee in colonial records. But his influence was not confined to New York. In the colonial records of Connecticut, he appears as intervening to obtain the remission of a fine imposed upon a Jew there. Now, the court remitted the fine with the comment that it did so as a token of its respect to the said Mr. Asa Levy, and he left a considerable estate over which there was a long legal contest following it. Next we come to the Vanderbilt family, which is an American family of Dutch origin who gained prominence during the Gilded Age, and their success began with the shipping and railroad empires of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and the family expanded into various other industries and philanthropy. Cornelius Vanderbilt's descendants went on to build grand mansions on Fifth Avenue in New York City, luxurious summer cottages in Newport, Rhode Island, the palatial Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina, and various other opulent homes. Now, the Vanderbilts were once the wealthiest family in America, and Cornelius Vanderbilt was the richest American until his death in 1877. After that, his son William acquired his father's fortune and was the richest American until his death in 1885. Now, the Vanderbilts' prominence lasted until the mid-20th century, when the family's 10 great Fifth Avenue mansions were all torn down, and most other Vanderbilt houses were sold or turned into museums in what has been referred to as the fall of the House of Vanderbilt. Now, the fall of the houses is a common theme throughout this series, is it not? And is describing the full takeover by one specific group using a multitude of elite families along the way. And when their use is over, down they fall like Humpty Dumpty. And no, they won't be put back together again either. The modern day version of this was described in the Clowns in Panic show and is being seen today by more and more people. Now, branches of the Vanderbilt family are found all along the United States East Coast. Contemporary descendants include journalist and CIA agent Anderson Cooper, actor Timothy Oliphant, musician John P. Hammond, and screenwriter James Vanderbilt. Now, the progenitor of the Vanderbilt family was Jan Ertzen, or Ertzen, 1620 through 1705, and he was a Dutch farmer from the village of De Bilt in Utrecht, Netherlands, who emigrated to the Dutch colony of New Netherland as an indentured servant to the Van Couwenhoven family in 1650. Now, Jan was an original patentee, director of Boweries, which is farms, and founder of the New Netherland colony. He also founded the first European settlement on Long Island, called New Amersfoort, and was a shepherd of New Amsterdam in 1654. And he is noted as playing an active role in laying the foundations of the communities now known as Manhattan, Albany, Rensselaer, and Brooklyn. Now, descendants of the Van Couwenhoven family also include the Harriman family, railroad and various other things, Michael and Diana Douglas of film fame, Humphrey Bogart, Andy Roddick, the tennis player, the Jenner family. I always wondered why they achieved fame, as their only talent is being not talented. Lance Armstrong, the cyclist. The family was eventually to go on in the last 100 years to have 2 governors and a senator. Plus, they also have tentative links to the Wright brothers of aviation fame. Now, Jan's village name was added to the Dutch Van to create Van der Bilt, which evolved into Vanderbilt when the English took control of New Amsterdam, which is now Manhattan. And the family is also associated with the Dutch patrician Van der Bilt. But you have to understand that Van and Von are both titles of nobility, like Anna von Reitz. Now, his great-great-great-grandson Cornelius Vanderbilt began the prominence of the family and the 4th of 9 children born to a Staten Island family of modest means. Through his paternal great-great-grandmother Abigail Southard, he descends from the Republic of Sale President Jan Janzoon and his son Anthony Janzoon van Sailly. And they were among the earliest arrivals to the 17th century New Amsterdam. Now, in a number of documents dating back to this period, Anthony is described as a tawny or mulatto, as his mother was of Berber origin from Cartagena in the Kingdom of Mercia, which was a region in southeastern Spain. Now, Cornelius Vanderbilt left school at age 11 and went on to build a shipping and railroad empire that during the 19th century would make him one of the wealthiest men in the world. Leave school at 11 and achieve that. Tells you something about school, does it not? Or perhaps they were better taught back then than they are now. So he started with a single boat and he grew his fleet until he was competing with Robert Fulton for dominance of the New York waterways, his energy and eagerness earning him the nickname Commodore, which is a United States Navy title for a captain of a small task force. Whether that's related remains to be seen. Now, Fulton's company had established a monopoly on trade in and out of New York Harbor, and Vanderbilt, based in New Jersey at the time, flouted the law, steaming in and out of the harbor under a flag that read New Jersey must be free. I think there's a few people from New Jersey who want to be free from New York today. Times never change. And he also hired the attorney Daniel Webster to argue his case before the United States Supreme Court. Vanderbilt won, thereby establishing an early precedent for America's first laws of interstate commerce. The Vanderbilt family lived on Staten Island until the mid-1800s, when the Commodore built a house on Washington Place in what is now Greenwich Village. Though he always occupied a relatively modest home, members of his family would use their wealth to build magnificent mansions. And shortly before his death in 1877, Vanderbilt donated $1 million for the establishment of the Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Now, the Commodore left the majority of his enormous fortune to his eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt. William Henry, who outlived his father by just 8 years, increased the profitability of his father's holdings, increased the reach of the New York Central Railroad, and doubled the Vanderbilt wealth in 8 years. He built the first of what would become many grand Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue at 640 Fifth Avenue. William Henry appointed his first son Cornelius Vanderbilt II as the next head of house. Cornelius II built the largest private home in New York at 1 West 58th Street, containing approximately 154 rooms, and was designed by George B. Post. He also built the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island. Cornelius's brother William Kissam Vanderbilt also featured prominently in the family affairs. He also built a home on Fifth Avenue and would become one of the great architectural patrons of the Gilded Age, hiring the architects for the third and surviving Grand Central Terminal. He also built Marble House at 596 Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island. George Washington Vanderbilt II, the third and youngest son of William Henry Vanderbilt and youngest brother of Cornelius II, hired architect Richard Morris Hunt and landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted to construct Biltmore Estate on 125,000 acres near Asheville, North Carolina. Now, the 250-room mansion and 176,000 square feet of floor space remains on the top of the list of largest houses in the United States to date. So, having introduced the Dutch of the more distant past, we're going to bring it nearer to our time, starting in the 1940s now, and going through each year of what is known as the Dutch Deep State. Yes, they have one as well. In fact, most countries do. And this covers the period 1940 through 1950s. Now, the Dutch Deep State was rebooted after World War II by the British and the Americans, and the Dutch outsourced Dutch Secret Service agents to front lines in countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and other unknown countries, and started a Dutch Gladio division, which got badly out of hand. Now, the Dutch were the leading illegal drug traffickers in the EU from the 1980s onwards, and were also named during the 2010s as the world leaders of hosting child porn. They were free of mass casualty terrorist attacks for at least 10 years, and housing many Western-backed international courts may reflect its close ties with the supranational deep state. And maybe that region was the hub for creating them. Operation Market Garden may not have been as much of a failure as most people would think. But Operation Market Garden was said to be a failed World War II military operation fought in the Netherlands from the 17th to the 25th of September in 1944, and it was the brainchild of Field Marshal Sir Bernard Law Montgomery and strongly supported by Winston Churchill and also Franklin Roosevelt, of Dutch origin, remember. The airborne part of the operation was undertaken by the 1st Allied Airborne Army, with the land operation by the Triple X Corps of the 2nd British Army. Now, the objective was to create a 64-mile salient into German territory with a bridgehead over the River Rhine, creating an Allied invasion route into northern Germany. It failed, however, to secure a bridgehead over the Rhine, with the advance being halted at the river. The CIA recruited Dutch agent Jan Constantine and 4 others, trained them in Amsterdam and dropped them in as what seems to be a mercenary-style operation. And according to a parliamentary inquiry supported by the Dutch MOD and a study from the VU University Amsterdam, Bernhard ordered the launch of what they first named as a stay-behind network of Secret Service agents that had secretly started opposition groups against the Germans or Russians in the late stages of the war. These agents, around 10 at first, tried developing a plan to have a backup mechanism in place for armed civilians that would fight against the Russians. 2 separate groups that originated out of the war were targeted and professionalized by the British. These groups at first did not know of each other's existence. Common theme that. Teaching 2 separate groups and not making each other aware. All very compartmentalization now. The Dutch committed war crimes after they tried to reclaim control of the Dutch East Indies, better known as Indonesia, in 1945, sometimes in cooperation with the British. And many files in the Dutch National Archive are still secret more than 70 years later. Bernhard van Biesterveld appears to have been a figure of central importance in the Dutch deep state. By his own account, he consulted 12 men before arranging the first Bilderberger meeting held in the Netherlands in 1954. Now, the group, initially exclusively male, has had 170 Dutch members over the years, more than any other similarly sized European state. By way of comparison, there have only been 2 documented Dutch visitors to the Pinay Circle, Pinaycerecle, Cornelius Bosses and Frans Alphonse Maria Alting van Gisau. It should also be noted that during the 1950s in Holland, cannabis was banned. After World War II, the CIA employed a few Dutch Secret Service agents that actively started opposition groups alongside their own agents in Romania and Bulgaria from the 1950s. News revealed this back in 2016. Now, the Bulgarian agency just mentioned is placed in Sofia and is the CIA Eastern Europe Division, and where Neil Keenan was located, and also why he was located there. Now, according to the segments, they actively employed partisans to stimulate anti-communist actions after a conference in Washington in 1951. The CIA and AIVD, at which point known as BVD, both didn't have any recollection upon request in their databases. What they did there was not recollected, at least according to the official narrative. Now, the CIA commonly have a short memory, and remarkably, they have a very poor record of being able to keep records at all, often losing them, or a weird coincidence that files are all destroyed by fire, something that has afflicted the CIA CIA badly since its inception. Files go missing or burn, all caused by Russian collusion. Is another coincidence that seemingly plagues the CIA. Now, around 1952, the framework was finalised and two groups of 21 Secret Service agents, along with the newly formed BVD, started actively recruiting right-wing civilians in useful positions that did not have a leading position in their workplace or any communist ideas, such as teachers, salesmen, welders, drivers, physicians, and sailors. Don't leave anyone out. This became later to be known as Operation Gladio. These two groups were called Operations and Intelligence. So they went from OI then to AI now. Work that one out. And this group directly reported to the Minister of War and former officer Keyes' staff from 1952 and the Prime Minister Wilhelm Drees from 1956. In the 1950s and 60s, the US deep state had vastly more money than the BVD and used it to exert influence into the Netherlands. By 1958, for example, the CIA paid the salaries of approximately 51 of the 691 employees of the Dutch service. And according to the Dutch investigative program Brandpunt, the agents-to-be, of which 7 appeared on TV, all were personally recruited by one member who became their handlers and appeared at their door with letters from Keyes' staff or the Prime Minister Wilhelm Drees. They all recalled the strange, exceptional professionalism of the operation, the need-to-know basis, training in plausible deniability, and they were required to be armed 24/7. They never met another agent and were also trained in the US and the UK, which would also be their backup basis of operations in case of a Russian attack. Now, for some of these positions, individuals were trained up to 400 hours, and in the 1950s, 24 divisions were established. Operation had 7, intelligence had 17. At the end of the 1950s, all these agents had their own secret intelligence station in their own house, and a container with weapons and equipment which was to be held secret from their families. If someone, for any reason whatsoever, disappeared, they'd vanish into the mist and never be found, was what was stated about these agents. Now, the headquarters of the Intelligence Division was Villa Marhees, Marheeze, which is located in the coastal town of Wassenaar, according to an essay made up with help from some of these former agents. Now, the operations located at first in Utrecht, later in Amsterdam in the headquarters of the Dutch Marines, fell directly under the Prime William Drees and had these 7 different divisions: PSYOPs, sabotage, connections, falsification, operational finance, security, and codes. And operations was noted as the Extreme Measures Unit. Now, their task was to commit acts of sabotage, acts of violence against persons, politicians, activists, and journalists included. that supported the quote-unquote enemy. They commit robberies and made propaganda that would hurt the enemy, whoever the perceived boogeyman of the day was to be. Gladio was already infiltrated in the Dutch media, and the head of the Dutch public broadcaster of NCRV and the head of the chairman of the Dutch Council of Journalism, Tom Herstel, was an instructor for the PSYOP division. As an interesting note, Villa Marquise, Klingendal Institute, and one of the 3 royal palaces of Bernhard and Juliana Wilhelmina are located in the same small town of Wesenaar, within 6 miles of each other. It's not a coincidence. So who is Prince Bernhard? Well, Prince Bernhard was a member of the Reiter SS, R-E-I-T-E-R, a mounted unit of the SS, and had joined the Nazi Party before the war. He later also joined the National Socialist Motor Corps. Various members of his family and friends were aligned with the Nazis prior to the Second World War, and a number of them attended the royal wedding. Protocol demanded that the prospective prince consort be invited to an audience with his head of state, who at the time was Adolf Hitler. Now, Hitler gave an account of the conversation he had with Bernhard in his book Table Conversations, and this book was a collection of monologues, remarks and speeches Hitler gave during lunch or dinner to those he had invited. Now, the prince's brother, Prince Ashwin of Lippe-Westerfeld, was an officer in the German army. Although the secret services on both sides were interested in this peculiar pair of brothers, no improper contacts or leaks of information were ever discovered. Now, he cut off relations with those members of his family who were enthusiastic Nazis, it was said, and as a sign of his Dutchness near the end of the war, he spoke only Dutch when negotiating the surrender of the German forces in the Netherlands. That completes the 1950s. Deep state. Let's go into the 1960s. Max Koonstam was a Dutch deep state politician and also Secretary General of the Action Committee for the United States of Europe. As well as attending the 1961 Bilderberg meeting, he attended 27 of the subsequent meetings and became a member of the Bilderberg Advisory Committee, which chooses the steering committee. Think tank people. Someone needs to steer them off flat earth, quite frankly. And no, it's not real. The Dutch government accepted a request from NATO and Germany to place 22 B-28 nuclear bombs at Volkel Air Base. And these bombs and a US Air Force squadron was placed there with the task to fly to Cuba if the Cuban Missile Crisis would get out of hand. Does that make any sense? Flying to Cuba from Holland. I guess people didn't question anything back then either. Maybe we'll find out later why they were placed there. Now, the Dutch would not acknowledge that as fact until 2013, when Ruud Lubbers revealed it himself. NATO did not acknowledge this until 2019. Nazi Germany had left traumatic feelings in a lot of national people, resulting in an end of democracy. And the 1960s slowly saw a lot of new non-denominational people and institutions. This paved the way for a lot of extreme public discourse for such a small country in future decades, which the deep state has trouble handling up until this day. In Groningen, fracking for natural gas fields was started, which remains a controversial topic for deep state politics up until this day in Holland, as halting the fracking would have resulted in an economic collapse for that coalition cabinet. And the reason being is the Dutch didn't want Russian gas, or the deep state didn't, is the correct term really, and that the Middle East had its fluctuations. We now go into the 1970s. The Dutch Prince Bernhard and Queen Juliana returning from Italy because of developments in the Lockheed Martin scandal. Prince Bernhard played a major role until his exposure by the Lockheed bribery scandals, which caused the cancellation of the 1976 Bilderberg meeting, when Dutch Prime Minister Joop den Uyl ordered an inquiry. Bernhard refused to answer reporters' questions, stating, quote, "I am above such things," unquote. Never a truer word spoken in jest. Now, the results of the inquiry led to a constitutional crisis in Holland, in which Queen Juliana threatened to abdicate if Bernhard was prosecuted. Sort of threw them all out. And Bernhard was spared. Well, I never. But he did step down from several public positions and also from chairing the Bilderberg meetings. Now, the Lockheed bribery scandals encompassed a series of bribes and contributions made by officials of the US aerospace company Lockheed Martin. And this went on from the late 1950s into the 1970s in the process of negotiating the sale of aircraft. Now, the scandal caused considerable political controversy in what was then called West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and also Japan. In the US, the scandal nearly led to Lockheed's downfall, as it was already struggling due to the commercial failure of the L1011 TriStar airliner. Now, in late 1975 and early 1976, a subcommittee of the US Senate, led by Senator Frank Church, concluded that members of the Lockheed board had paid members of friendly governments to guarantee contracts for military aircraft. In 1976, it was publicly revealed that Lockheed had paid $22 million in bribes to foreign officials in the process of negotiating the sale of aircraft, including the F-104 Starfighter, the so-called deal of the century. This is how their world, the old world, works. All based on bribes and skullduggery. But notice, no one is ever charged under the National Security Act. Why? Because companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Halliburton and Bechtel, along with the CIA and their subsidiaries, are the national security, which was created to protect those mentioned groups. Notice there was no crying by the portal people media of collusion back then as well, as that only applies if you don't like a political opponent. Now, Victor Halberstad, who was an economist who has maintained a low public profile in spite of attending all Bilderberg meetings since 1975 and being Honorary Secretary General of the group from 1980 through 2000. And the now notorious drug policy was strangely green lit in the 1970s, with the withdrawal on the complete ban on cannabis and the start of coffee shops in Amsterdam and Utrecht. In the report it said they called this an experiment, and it never became clear why the Dutch chose to do this. I do. It's fairly simple. The CIA told them to do so, is why, as they ran many of the drug operations for black budget money. But the Dutch cities had a favourable location, close to each other and other European cities, high density and quick and modern infrastructure. As globalisation caused companies to outsource to Asia, the oil crisis of 1973 and the loss of jobs caused many people to become homeless and also hopeless. And that turned many to drugs. And also many working for the Chinese, Russian and Italian mafia that had set up hubs in Amsterdam as everything was legalised. Now, after an extreme surge of heroin abuse and the rise of drug dealers in the main streets of Amsterdam, Utrecht, Rotterdam and The Hague, most main drugs except cannabis were banned at the end of the 1970s. At that point, many Dutch crime bosses had already become skilled drug dealers known for their expertise, and this became the start of the Dutch illegal drug trade, where Klaas Bruinsma created his career in Amsterdam. The 1980s. Paul Bremer, they're always connected, aren't they, was the US ambassador to the Netherlands from 1983 through 1986. Max van der Stoel became the main coordinator of the Operations and Intelligence, which is the Gladio Group. Queen Juliana, had just pressured the public into not looking any further into Bernhard when Prince Klaus, a former soldier of the German army, was revealed to be the future Prince of Beatrix Amgard. In 2016, Klaus was accused of picking up underage boys in the city of Amsterdam and at least watching former Dutch Minister of Finance, Onno Ruding, having sex with one of them back in 1982. The victim recalled pedophile prostitution to be tolerated in that time. Now, the first scandals of VI pedophile, VIP, are dated from this era, early 1980s. And were not reported in the corporate media. No surprise there. Now, Prince Klaus, there appears to be only one earlier hint that he, for example, liked little boys when the Netherlands Government Information Service issued the statement that the prince is not homosexual and wants the rumours to stop following an article of the Telegraph. Now, he was suspected after several sources were citing him that he also visited a gay bar in New York, having proof made with an infrared camera, and even Ronald Reagan was concerned at that time, stating that he was worried about their royal policies. Now, what I can guarantee is that gay bar in New York incident was a sting operation. This is what Gladio and CIA are all about, is getting people in awkward positions and then exploiting it for their own gains. And many top people have fallen victims of this often stage-managed manipulation games. Klaus Bruinsma and dozens of other lawyers, politicians, and Bernhard and his 1001 Club appear to be connected in one way or another in a sex cult, with alleged ritual abuse all the way to Marc Dutroux. Now, Marc Paul Alain Dutroux is a Belgian convicted serial killer, rapist, and also child molester. Dutroux was convicted in 1989 for the abduction and rape of 5 young girls, with his then-wife Michelle Martin and other accomplices. Now, bizarrely, he was released on parole after just 3 years in prison. And in 1996, Dutroux was arrested again on suspicion of having kidnapped, tortured, and sexually abused 6 girls aged between 8 and 19, 4 of whom died. And his widely publicised trial took place in 2004, 8 years later. Dutroux was convicted of all charges, along with the murder of a suspected former accomplice, and sentenced to life imprisonment. But Dutroux's accomplices, including Michelle Martin, Michel Lelivre, Michel Nihul, and Bernhard Weinstein. Interesting, the name Weinstein comes up again, like his notorious namesake Harvey. It turns out Bernhard Weinstein also had links to the Mossad. Jeffrey Epstein is also linked directly to Mossad as well. Now, independent researchers have uncovered evidence that Bernhard Weinstein was connected to the infamous Mossad spy agent Zev William Barkan, aka Bruckenstein, and sometime Israeli diplomat, for years involved in international espionage, including insurrection, fraud, and assassination spanning the globe in Austria, Dubai, Mumbai, Belgium, Holland, New Zealand, and also Canada. ISGP has their names pop up several hundred times regarding these matters, and Bruinsma, with his clan already connected to Gladio and controlling police units, one should wonder how powerful this boss exactly was. And his crime syndicate was being called by one news site as being involved at secretive parties in Amsterdam's financial district, the place where Nieuwsuur said cocaine is mandatory, with child abuse in the 1990s. And the editors of the article specifically mentioned stopping the investigation for the moment, citing the urge to stay alive for quite a while. Still in the 1980s, we come to what is known as the Israel influence. In October of 1981, Juliana appointed deep politicians Victor Halberstadt and Cees de Gallon to mediate the Dutch cabinet crisis. Now, the crisis originally was presented by the original narrative as a feud between the PM and the progressive Dries van Agt and his CDA fraction, and the socialists in the coalition headed by the Deputy Prime Minister, left-wing Joop den Uyl, and his PVDA party. Now, following the 1973 oil crisis and the major inflation and loss of jobs, the two could not reach an agreement on social reforms. And other forgotten details include the participation of the NATO double track decision of 1979. And what this essentially was NATO controlling countries' weapons amounts. And it was seen at the time globally as a positive towards disarming weapons. But in essence, it was neutralising countries' attempts at sovereignty, with NATO running their own army, to then be seen as the protectors of the EU, which is fake. NATO is Rothschild's private army. And then when you add back in the 22 B-28 nuclear bombs being placed there in the previous decade, perhaps those fake SALT agreements of that time makes more or perhaps less sense now. PVDA members wanted to participate in a protest in 1981 with 400,000 civilians in Amsterdam, as other protests regarding the Iran-Iraq war and the 1980s Afghan war were also becoming political hot topics. Now, another theory regarding this crisis was that Van Agt was removed by the Dutch deep state that backed Den Uyl, who has a picture in his bedroom and is also a close friend of the then Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, who was PM from 1973 until 1977 and was a supporter of Israel, as Van Agt was deemed too risky. Now, Van Agt is most known for his outspoken or sometimes explosive character, and remarked in the 1970s that the last remaining known Dutch convicted Nazi in prison should be released because he did not consciously experience the war and because he was Aryan. Now, he was relocated the Dutch embassy to Tel Aviv and told Dutch media in 1982 that Israel must not think that with provocations and attacks it will reach peace, as with gun violence, unilateral acts and breaking international law and not complying with decisions made by the international community, such as those that have been enacted by the UN, and actively supported sending and keeping UN troops in Lebanon during the 1982 Lebanon War. This is suggestive that the UN is a proxy organization of the State of Israel. Even after being cited for breaking more international rules by the UN, more violations than all other nations combined, it is always vetoed by America in particular. Now, Van Agt became a staunch supporter of Palestine and a hard critic of Israel, and remained it well into the 2000s. Meanwhile, Dupe Den Uyl spoke on the Jerusalem Conference of International Terrorism as the speaker for the Dutch response to terrorism. And interestingly enough, Van Agt's cabinet had a lot of politicians connected to the deep state milieu not known at that time. Van Agt, one-time Bilderberger, Max van Stoel, head of the Dutch Gladio division from 1982, Hans van Mierlo, one-time Bilderberger, started with the future mayor of Amsterdam, a shadow government modelled on the British in 1971, and publicly advocated for nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union. I guess he is a NATO clown then. Hans van den Broek after Van Ark was put out of power, as a lot of privatisation was then slowly introduced. Privatisation, that means the clowns harvesting the stock into a tighter circle they own and control. Right, we finish up with the 1980s Dutch deep state and all that things that were going on in Holland, with the fact that the Bilderbergers, all Dutch prime ministers since 1982 have visited the Bilderberg meetings. Ruud Lubbers, Wim Kok, Jan-Peter Balkenende and Mark Rutte. In the 1980s, there was a term called Hollanditis, and that word was coined in 1981 by the US historian Walter Lacour to describe the rise of Dutch pacifism. In 1983, 550,000 participants demonstrated in The Hague aimed against the deployment of US cruise missiles carrying nuclear warheads. There was also the Revolutionary Anti-Racist Action Group, who bombed property, and the Dutch Interior Minister termed them a terrorist group. And one of the victims was a prince and the owner of a leading supermarket chain, member of the 1001 Club. And it said even if he didn't receive protection, who was behind these attacks? And it is a question unanswered today. Probably Gladio. So we go into the 1990s, and crime bosses and corrupt officials were intertwined at this point. An inter-regional investigational unit known as IRT was the subject of a parliamentary inquiry. Now, the inquiry revealed that the police officers infiltrated Klaus Bruinsma and his successor's drug empire and were actively participating in it, and also executed several criminal acts, which caused both teams to end up investigating each other. And most notably, the employment of civilian criminal infiltrates was controversial. The inquiry and its findings have caused the biggest law changes in the Dutch criminal justice system. Then, in the 1990s, became the official Dutch admittance of Gladio, as up until this point the Dutch never admitted that it even existed. Several weapon stashes were found and reported by corporate media, but mayors, prosecutors and other high-ranking officials all denied knowing the origins. Even when the newspaper Elsevier released an article naming several Dutch spooks, at least 2 MPs as KGB agents, who was a spook himself, were involved in the cover-up. Now, the agent was later revealed to be working for the World League for Freedom and Democracy, and the precursor of that group was the World Anti-Communist League, WACL, which was an international non-governmental organisation of anti-communist politicians and groups founded in 1966 under the initiative of Chiang Kai-shek, who was the leader of the Republic of China in Taiwan. Now, Ruud Lubbers admitted the existence in 1990 of a Dutch division of the Operation Gladio network, but noted that the Dutch division was not under direct NATO command, but the government. He lied. NATO is controlling the governments. And what this also proves is that NATO, which is run by ex-CIA agents such as Robert David Steele, who wrote the intelligence handbook for NATO, as revealed in the Clowns in Panic show. Now, the organisation operated under the single-agent principle, meaning they did not work in groups, they lie, and therefore could not commit the crimes like the Bologna bombing, the Pettino bombing, and the Piazza Fontana bombing. All civilian employees were fired at this point. A Belgian agent revealed to Amsterdam main newspaper Het Parool that the Belgian and Dutch Gladio networks were in fact actively working together and meeting regularly. Of course, Belgium is a fake-created country to run counter-operations against we the people. It is a military base and think tank country like Israel is in the Middle East. Belgium is actually just South Holland. In May 2004, Lubers was accused by Cynthia Bruzak, an American UNHRC employee, of sexual harassment following a meeting in his office that was attended by two other UNHRC HCR staff members. Now, 3 years prior to the controversy over the sexual harassment case, Ruud Lubbers was criticised for his mishandling of the UNHCR/CSC UK 2002, which uncovered the widespread sexual exploitation of refugee children by aid workers and peacekeepers in 3 West African countries, Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone. The study team, which had encountered these findings unexpectedly whilst conducting a broader assessment, documented 67 allegations implicating 40 aid agencies and several peacekeeping battalions, and often involving humanitarian workers and peacekeepers exchanging meagre aid supplies, biscuits, soap and plastic sheeting, for sex with children. That is the UN involvement again, and they have exploited many countries in this way, particularly in African countries. The UN are not peacekeepers. They are a highly organised, piracy-based company that is not interested in peace, P-E-A-C-E. It is peace, P-I-E-C-E. They take a piece of this and they take a piece of that, with the ultimate goal of taking a piece of everything, just like NATO. Now, Ruud Lubbers' response to this report of the sexual exploitation of children in Africa was to deny the findings, discredit the authors and excuse the behaviours. For example, in a CNN interview on May 8, 2002, Lubers was heard to deny the problem in the face of CNN's own research, all done by Langley agents, which confirmed the problem existed and was taken to task by the interviewer for dismissing these exploitative relationships inter alia as romances, he said. You don't romance with children. And he was even roundly criticised by his own staff for that interview. And despite repeated attempts by Lubbers to lead a negative campaign against the report, the international community and governments in particular took the allegations seriously and passed a UN General Assembly Resolution A/RES/57/306. Investigation into sexual exploitation of refugees by aid workers in West Africa in May 2003, requiring the UN to take action at the highest level to tackle such abuses. And this led to the UN Secretary-General's Bulletin called Special Measures for Protection from Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse in October 2003, and an endorsement of the Interagency Standing Committee's Working Group on Sexual Abuse and Exploitation, which had already been set up a year earlier in June 2002 in response to the report. This is the classic sleight of hand tactics of the agencies. Give the illusion of investigating something, take over the investigation with their own puppets, and stifle the discourse and the investigations. Because if the exploitation group set up in 2003 worked, the practice would have stopped. It hasn't. It got worse. And after these revelations, the Dutch public did not ask questions about Gladio anymore, as Lubbers left The Hague for an international career. Again, the classic case of diverting the people's attention, a bit like COVID, whilst they launch Operation Humanity Takedown via technology. And it's also a common theme to use sex as a distraction. Muslim terrorism, the war on terror, and several conflicts like in Sudan, Yugoslavia and Libya were becoming more popular due to commercial media and increased television coverage, such as events by newly viewable commercial TV stations such as CNN or the national known RTL. Yugoslavia is next. A Dutch major was revealed to have ordered the MIVD in 1995 to secretly go to a lieutenant who had made pictures of Serbian war crimes in Srebrenica. The photographic films could have proven the Dutch would have known of the genocide much earlier than the international community would have condemned it to be. The film was damaged beyond repair after an, quote, unusual production process, unquote. The Lieutenant Peter Putten of the research unit of the Royal Netherlands Marechaussee argued in 2015 that the mistakes that led to the film never to be published and damaged beyond repair was part of a cover-up by the Dutch government. Isn't it funny how evidence disappears in unusual circumstances, is it not? If not setting fire to whole buildings or whole cities in the past to hide the evidence of a previously advanced civilization, this practice is all too common. Almost as common as killing those who have the evidence. And one of the leading involved MIVD researchers did not go that far, but did argue that it was strange the Dutch MOD, Ministry of Defence, told him to remain silent. And it seems the NATO countries tried to make sure Yugoslavia destroyed itself from inside out and did not want anyone to find proof that they actively participated in war crimes with other purposes. Then came more Gladio investigations. the newspaper De Groene published Dutch historians Wiebes and de Graaf's findings in an extra page, depicting Lubbers to have lied about the actual clandestine operations and purposes of the organisation. Their initial direct allies from the start next to the British were the CIA and also Mossad. And it appears a clandestine planning committee planned and organised foreign counter-intelligence operations that at times tried to instigate coups d'etat. The Dutch Gladio Division and the predecessor of the IVD were actually working together in the same building, actively aiming to work together with the same methods for policies the SDS were following. Now, at the supposed end of Gladio, there were 38 known Dutch hidden weapon depots. The Dutch only weren't that successful. They had informants close to the Indonesian president Sukarno up until 1964, as he was drifting towards communists, when the CIA attempted a coup in 1965. The legendary Mr. Sukarno, he of Neil Keenan fame, and All About the Gold, and Kennedy, which is a black son family, claiming the stolen gold looted out of several countries during World War II. Of course, the CIA attempted a coup there. All About the Gold is why. Now, 2 Dutch agents got caught in Moscow and jailed for 2 years. Suriname dictator Desi Bouterse, who was steering to communism by befriending Fidel Castro and the leader of Grenada. He discovered Right-Hand and Sergeant Roy Horb suddenly got gifted expensive horses, which led to his contacts being outed as CIA operatives, which led to a murderous spree of Bouterse, which included Horb also. In 2007, Maxime Verhagen revealed a plan was cancelled to overthrow the dictatorship in 1986. Ruud Lubbers, Maxime Verhagen, Hans van den Broek confessed they and the Americans actually planned to overthrow and arrest Bouterse with a full invasion in 1987, but did not do so out of fear for too many Dutch casualties. Now, the villa also discovered and aided Mossad in destroying a submarine communications cable between Egypt and Libya in 1972. De Groene also confirmed the Spanish Gladio agents had attempted to kill the Dutch Princess Irene in 1975, and Prime Minister Kals was rumoured to have escaped a coup in 1965 by the Dutch counterparts. 2 former agents threatened to put agricultural poison in the baby powder in Holland in 1992 when blackmailing Dutch food business Nutricia. Nice people. Not. Into the 2000s we go. Wim Kok and his government resigned after the parliamentary inquiry about Yugoslavia had published their findings. And at this point, neoconservatives from the SDS had surged to leading roles in the Dutch government and aligned institutes. See, it's not just America and these fake institutes. Leading the Dutch to join war on terror under Jan-Peter Balkenende's command. Neoconservatives in the war on terror. Pim Fortuyn was assassinated on the 6th of May 2002, a week before the prime ministerial elections. His direct opponent, Jan-Peter Balkenende was elected instead. It's funny how that happens, isn't it? According to an international weekly journal of science called Nature Research, Balkenende's government oversaw at least 27 instances of CIA planes using Dutch airports near Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague for extraordinary rendition in just the first 4 years. One instance had the final destination set as Amsterdam, where a possible black site would be, which still remains unclear to this day. The leaked reports and their findings were not reported in the Dutch commercially controlled media, and in a big leak of diplomatic cables, Balkenende turned out to be quite active during the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, gaining Dutch support for joining the intervention in both cases and promising to seemingly back the US for as long as they would be there. Then in 2007, Gladio revelations ramped up again. Investigative reporter Peter R. de Vries stunned the public with new revelations about Operation Gladio in a 4-year-long investigation, linking numerous weapons depots in Utrecht, Amsterdam, and Roermond to Gladio. Several corrupt police officers were revealed to have turned a blind eye and even massively and actively participated in the distribution and hiding of weapons and munitions to Belgium and unknown foreign Gladio criminals. Bit like Operation Fast and Furious, is it not, Mr. Holder? Same thing, same people, same clowns. At first, weapons ended up in the hands of the Dutch main drug lords. The weapons were traced back to be used in murders on police agents, robberies on armoured cash transport cars, assassinations and more in Denmark, France, Germany, according to further investigation by Brandpunt. Most notable was the consistent occurrence of arms smuggling and suspects arrested but released and not prosecuted. After the intervention of public prosecutors that derailed investigations until the statute of limitations kicked in. It's classic, isn't it? And what that tells you is it is an agency-based crime syndicate. That is what Gladio is, along with all the other agencies of Five Eyes and Plus. It's an international crime syndicate. Even when the new owner of a munitions shop requested the shop to be cleared of any wrongdoing publicly, summary proceedings had been rejected twice. Arms dealers were suspected of smuggling Gladio weapons were never jailed, but even given their licenses back while the case was under investigation. Meanwhile, weapons had been linked to murders on communists. The MIVD was listed as the company to have covered up the instances of massive thefts of the underground depots hidden in the Dutch woods. At least one known company indicted had admitted its former owners were probably involved in Gladio, and the whole investigation was said to look like a mafia movie, as several retired owners only declared to the police that they should stop searching, as this goes much further, upon being released the next day. The Belgian journalist interviewed called it ludicrous that the Dutch did not instigate a parliamentary inquiry, as it appeared all Gladio groups just went rogue and were full with Nazis in every Gladio country. And he also implicated them in the Olof Palme assassination. He was the Swedish Prime Minister. Koos Hertogs, murderer, kidnapper and rapist of 3 girls, was named in the book of Yugoslavian secret agent Slobodan Mitric as a Dutch Gladio agent, who he had trained with to attempt a coup on an African country bordered by South Africa that was a former Portuguese colony, which points to Mozambique. Hertogs was filmed in an investigation with Peter R. de Vries as being entangled in a cover-up with the presiding judge, the Vice President of the Hague Court, Cornelis Stolk. The Vice President of the Hague Court, covering it up. How did he cover it up with the Vice President of the Hague Court? He gave him child pornography in exchange for a better judge, an evaluating psychiatrist that was previously married to Stolk, and also free driver's lessons. And Stolk, the Vice President of the Hague Court, actually managed to get an early release for Hertogs. In August 2012, writer Patrick Oomans published the book The Case Koos H, K-O-O-S H, in which he questions Koos H of being a serial killer and concludes that he doesn't fit the profile. VI pedophile, including Hertogs, Joris, Demink and Klos Bruinsma, were all in a large, long-reaching network and started to appear as official opposition narrative during the 2010s, which raised questions at the time where one should look. Well, that's fairly simple. It's 2 sides of the same coin. That is the ploy. Like Republican and Democrat. Both Trump and Kushner were avid Democrats prior to 2016. Labour and Conservative in the UK. Same programme, the illusion of being opposition. All documents regarding Gladio were deleted in the 1990s. Oh, how convenient that is. I guess that came under the term national security again then. And De Vries' sources claims someone just stole all important pieces of evidence when we got close to a case. So all of this now will remain memory hold and a Dutch third rail topic. Brandpoint and De Vries and their investigations appear to imply Gladio has never ended, which was backed by several former agents and police investigators. Brandpoint found a classified file from 1998 which stated preparations have been made to make future O&I operations possible. Personnel and materials have been reserved. Then an unregistered company named Quia Oportet, Q-U-I-A-O-P-O-R-T-E-T, was listed and was named as successor if needed in both the Dutch MOD and the Dutch Ministry of General Affairs in their files back in 2002. but the government responded this company and all files regarding it are now declared state secret and will not be released until 2050. Is this a confirmation of Operation Gladio B? You bet it is. Right, we continue into the 2010s with the Dutch deep state. And it was at this point, with the rise of internet and social media, the importance of controlling the narrative on media became important. And the Dutch were active, specialised contributors to what is called counter-terrorism. The Dutch called the Russians not neutral in this time period and therefore not welcome in the investigation of the Malaysian Airlines number 17. Sibren de Jong, Maria de Jong and the Dutch MOD then set up the Dutch cluster of the Integrity Initiative. The Integrity Initiative Mark II is an organ of the UK deep state, controlled through the Institute for Statecraft. And this was exposed in 2018-2019 by 7 sets of leaked documents. And it was blogged at the time that it offers us a glimpse into the very dirty world of surveillance and official disinformation. And if we actually had a free media, this would be the biggest story of the day. Now, Lucy Morgan Edwards summarised it on January 2019 as an extremely shady, covert disinformation and anti-democratic deep state outfit. In 2018, Rayan van Rybroek appeared on Dutch TV, introduced in 2018 on Dutch TV as a cyber security expert and a hacker working for an intelligence agency and multiple governments, again indicting Russia, China and North Korea. Langley then. In 2019, the Klingendahl Institute hosted Strengthening Europe's Soft and Hard Defence, a Chatham House, another UK think tank group, rule meeting attended by at least 4 members of the UK's Deep State Institute for Statecraft group. The brother of a deceased Gladio member gifted his brother's enormous depot to the police of Rotterdam in 2019. And in July 2019, the AIVD tried to prohibit Dutch journalist Huib Modderkolk from releasing a book that was planning to reveal the name of the operation and a foreign spook that cooperated in the Cozy Bear case. Now, the case was noted by lawyers to be very strange, as the AIVD seemingly tried to censor parts that were requested with public sources before he even finished the book. Now, the AIVD won the case, no surprise there, even though Modderkolk had already removed details after he emailed them a concept version. Now, Modderkolk started investigating after he produced an article regarding the sources of WikiLeaks, and his office was inexplicably hit with power outages, which he and his colleagues suspected was done deliberate. No shit, Sherlock. Now, Modderkolk worked 6 years on this book called It's War, but Nobody Sees It, and among other things revealed the CIA often utilised the AIVD for quite intensive tasks, which included aggressive cyber warfare such as involvement in the spreading of the Stuxnet virus in Iran, that the AIVD got nothing back for return. Among other things, the book is full of interesting, questionable decisions by the AIVD, including the suicide of infant hackers, giving the CIA classified information for drone attacks killing more children, GCHQ hacking European institutions with the protection of Europol, or the fact that Russian cybersecurity company Kaspersky was targeted multiple times for alleged cooperation with the FSB, given Ryan van Rybroek's ludicrous allegations some very strange coincidences. Now, Mother Colk is de facto the only book about the AIVD that was allowed in Newser, raising questions why the book was so publicised in the first place, and it was suggested perhaps as a form of limited hangout. In other words, it's an agency-based tactic to see who shakes out, and those who put their head above the parapet end up with no head. 2020s. While other governments were mandating the wearing of masks in shops and public places in an ostensible effort to slow the spread of the fake COVID-19, the Dutch government refused to do so except for public transport, but citing a lack of medical evidence that such a measure was advisable, which was an indication of the limits of the Dutch deep state. It is said that the Dutch are the world champions in providing particularly American corporate companies with locations and hidden deals for letterbox companies aiding financial fraud, and which caused banks to capitalize on the housing bubbles in the inner cities. Deep state exposers that influenced Dutch public opinion, willingly or not, were listed as Joel van der Rijden, Danny Jowenko, Kees van de Pijl, Sybil Edmonds, and William Thompson. He's the same guy that was with Wilcock. Wouldn't surprise me. Groups. The Netherlands is home to several large multinational companies, including Heineken, Unilever, ABN AMRO, the ING Group, and Rabobank. Also Philips, which was a major funder of Le Cercle. We covered that hidden secret society group a while back in one of our shows. And also the Royal Dutch Shell Group, generally led by Bilderbergers in the recent years. Bellingcat, oh my, they always prop up, has its own office in The Hague. Spies in The Hague, well, I never. Fairy or otherwise. And receives significant funding from Dutch sources through formerly private organisations like the Adesium Foundation. Their universities have produced numerous deep state politicians. LSV Minerva, which seems similar to the Skull and Bones, only a tiny bit less effective, or not as thoroughly investigated, it would seem. The Secret Commission for Intelligence and Security Services revealed the MIVD had collected 1.8 million metadata of wiretapped telephone data in just 1 month. This data was then shared with the NSA. Oops. Just as I had mentioned a long time ago in our shows about the interconnected nature of the Five Eyes system, which went global with the NSA and CIA playing the lead role in it, along with GCHQ. The Klingendahl Institute. In 1983, the Klingendahl Institute was founded by the Dutch MOD, of all places, and it was the result of a merger of 5 small think tank groups. Nowadays, it receives 75% of its funding from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Dutch MOD, and is mentioned amongst major national think tanks such as Egmont and Chatham House in Integrity Initiative documents. Functions. The Netherlands likes to boost an image of being the most well-behaved boy in the EU class and hosts several international organisations supporting, quote, democracy, unquote. And it has its own military info war system. Relations or public relations with NATO. NATO was popular in the Netherlands and actively participates in all parts of its joint military operations, including pro-pagan Dar about them. The Dutch, led by Mark Rutte in the 2010s, have adopted a form of realpolitik, similar to Angela Merkel, and are willing to do anything to stay on as members of the in-group that runs the Western world, to be taken serious inside of NATO and to be in the core countries of NATO. The country is the seat for NATO courts, such as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICC and ICJ, which are used to prosecute NATO's enemies, while being depicted as impartially dispensing justice on behalf of the international community. The International Criminal Court is located in The Hague. The ICC, wrote Tony Cartalucci, is neither international nor a legitimate court, but is most certainly criminal. It's an institutionalized tool, one of many used by Western corporate financier interests to coerce and control nations across the developing world. They also house the International Court of Justice. Just Us is the correct term. The International Court of Just Us ignored the blatantly illegality of the 2003 Iraq War, even when the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Commission found Tony Blair and a bunch of US government officials guilty of war crimes. All ignored. The Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons was infamous for its biased investigations of alleged chemical weapons incidents like Douma, has its headquarters also in The Hague. And this is despite the heavy cover-up of disasters like the Bijlmer disaster. So what was that? Well, that was the Israeli El Al airline crashed into apartment buildings in 1992, and it was a cargo-only plane that killed 43 people, although the real figure is unknown, as that building contained many undocumented immigrants from Suriname and Aruba, both of which are former Dutch colonies, and also people from Ghana. Now, the flight through from New York was also stated to contain military-based chemicals, including sarin, the nerve gas. Now, the Dutch minister initially denied any military cargo, but after several people got sick on the ground, they eventually admitted it. The shipment was from a US chemical plant to the Israeli Institute for Biological Research under a US Department of Commerce license. Oops. A bit like the Wuhan Institute in China incident, then, is it not? Trafficking in Holland. The port of Rotterdam and Schiphol Airport are major world transit hubs for all kinds of cargo. Child porn. Over a third of all child porn across the world is hosted on Dutch servers, most likely KPMG servers, which is Rothschild's owned, where you'll find Team Bubba on those servers. Just saying. With an EU hotline reporting 82%, a British foundation 50%, defeating the second ranked country, the US, by 42%, and even one of the lowest estimates puts Holland as hosting 20% of all child porn images. The Amsterdam Internet Exchange, AMS-IX, is an internet exchange point based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Established in the early 1990s, the quality of this location and the Dutch infrastructure is given as reasoning, which does not make sense if the average nefarious pedophile would realise that the AIVD is self-proclaimed champion of wiretapping nationally and internationally, and seem to be logically expanding their eagerness to break the privacy of citizens under the guise of Ferdinand Grapperhaus. So the question was, who is hosting these sites? Well, it's fairly obvious. So who is Ferdinand Grapperhaus? He is undergoing scrutiny heavily this year back in Holland, and here is what I unearthed about it. As a response to parliamentary questions following the Argos radio programme documentary Shards of Glass and Dark Rituals, Grapperhaus said on August the 27th this year that there would be, quote, no independent investigation into ritual abuse of children in the Netherlands, unquote. The party's Growing Links, Socialist Party Netherlands and Party van Arbeid criticised the minister for his decision. But on the same day, Grapperhaus responded to public controversy when news media reported about the lack of social distancing at his own wedding amid the COVID-19 pandemic in the Netherlands, and he agreed to pay a €390 fine. But on October the 13th of this year, the House of Representatives, Netherlands, approved a motion with which the PVDA, GL and SP requested that an independent investigation be conducted into the nature and extent of organised sadistic abuse of children, bypassing Grapperhaus's original refusal to investigate. NATO, the US deep state, the CIA, and drug trafficking. Lieutenant Colonel in Staff Wilhelm Matzer, an advisory to the Secretary of NATO, Lord George Robertson, and Chris Donnelly, was arrested in February of 2003 after a package to Colombia was intercepted at the airport with €200,000 in bank transfer receipts and a CD with €200 million in payment orders with fake documents authorising the transfer of the same amount of money to Romania, a country, according to French state investigators, that has been hijacked by CIA agents for the war in Iraq. And after his very lenient conviction, he and articles or even images depicting him also vanished into the mist. There seems to be no limits for the levels of skullduggery these type of people get up to. This is the song, No Limits. No limits, indeed. We're going a bit back in time as we edge towards the end of our show tonight. And the Rothschilds and the House of Orange. Are they separate? Are they hell? The Rothschilds family combined with the Dutch House of Orange to found the Bank of Amsterdam in the early 1600s, was the world's very first central bank. William of Orange married into the English House of Windsor, which was actually Saxe-Gotha-Coburg, not Windsor. Windsor's the name of the bloody house, not the family. Taken King James II's daughter Mary as his bride. The Orange Order Brotherhood, which has in the past fomented Northern Ireland Protestant violence, put William III on the English throne, where he ruled both Holland and Britain. The Protestants are affiliated to the Orange Lodge. Have you not worked out yet who or what the orange stands for? Rothschilds and the House of Orange, and that has got zero to do with Britain. Yet to this day, the Catholic and Protestants in Ireland fight each other out of pure ignorance of their own history. Protestantism started in France, just like the House of Orange. They were a bunch of Catholics protesting, hence the term Protestant. And they were protesting against the crimes and corruption of the Roman Catholic Church, and has zero to do with Henry VIII. Now, in 1694, William III teamed up with the Rothschilds to launch the Bank of England, the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street, as the Bank of England is known, and is surrounded by 30-foot walls. 3 floors beneath it is the third largest stock of gold bullion in the world is stored. The daily London gold price fixing occurs at the N.M. Rothschild's Bank. As Bank of England Deputy Governor George Blunden put it, fear is what makes the bank's power so acceptable. The bank is able to exert its influence when people are dependent on us and fear losing their privileges, or when they are frightened. Mayor Amschel Rothschild sold the British government German Hessian mercenaries to fight against American revolutionaries and diverting the proceeds to his brother Nathan in London, where N.M. Nathan and Mayer, Rothschilds and Son, was established. Now, Mayer was a serious student of Kabbalah, no surprise, and launched his fortune on money embezzled from William IX, the royal administrator of the Hesse Castle region, and a prominent Freemason. The Rothschilds controlled Bering's, bankrolled the Chinese opium and African slave trades. Oops. Proof. Bering's Bank later became ING, International Netherlands Group. It financed the Louisiana Purchase when several states defaulted on its loans. Barings bribed Daniel Webster to make speeches stressing the virtues of loan repayment. The states held their ground, so the House of Rothschilds cut off the money spigot in 1842, plunging the US into a deep depression. It was often said that the wealth of the Rothschilds depended on the bankruptcy of nations. Mayor Amschel Rothschild once said, "I care not who controls a nation's political affairs, so long as I control her currency." War didn't hurt the family fortune either. The House of Rothschild financed the Prussian War, the Crimean War, and the British attempt to seize the Suez Canal from the French. Nathan Rothschild made a huge financial bet on Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, while also funding the Duke of Wellington's Peninsular campaign against Napoleon. They fund both sides and only they win. Both the Mexican War and the Civil War were gold mines for the family. A Rothschild family biography mentions a London meeting where an international banking syndicate decided to pit the American North against the South as part of a divide and conquer strategy. Oops. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck once stated the division of the United States into federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War. These bankers were afraid that the United States of America, not Europe, would upset their financial domination over the world, and the voice of the Rothschilds prevailed. Rothschild's biographer Derek Wilson says the family was the official European banker to the US government and strong supporters of the Bank of the United States. Family biographer Neil Ferguson notes a substantial and unexplained gap in private Rothschild's correspondence between 1854 and 1860. He says all copies of outgoing letters written by the London Rothschilds during the Civil War period were, quote, destroyed at the orders of successive partners, unquote. And there we have it again, of destroying all the evidence. Now, French and British troops had at the height of the Civil War encircled the US. The British sent 11,000 troops to the Crown-controlled Canada, which gave safe harbour to Confederate agents. Francis Napoleon III installed the Austrian Habsburg family member Archduke Maximilian as his puppet emperor in Mexico, where French troops massed on the Texas border. I bet Anna von Reitz, a Habsburg, won't tell you her family line were murdering Americans during the 1800s, will she? Only an 11th hour deployment of 2 Russian warships fleets by US ally Tsar Alexander II in 1863 saved the United States from recolonization. I'm going to repeat that again. Only an 11th hour deployment of 2 Russian warship fleets by the US ally Tsar Alexander II in 1863 saved the United States from recolonization. Well, they won't tell you that in American history in schools, books or documentaries or the mainstream media outlets, will they? No, it's the nasty Russians who saved American asses in 2 wars in the 1800s. But don't worry now, the Russians are coming to get you. And they have been since the 1950s. Are they in a rowing boat? Or have all Americans been duped? News flash. Russia is not a communist country. It is a Zionist-operated country and has been since 1919, ran by a Zionist stooge whose grandfather, Mordechai, who was Jewish, was involved in the Bolshevik Zionist-based revolution. His name? Vladimir Putin. Oops. That same year, the Chicago Tribune blasted Belmont. August Belmont was a US Rothschild's agent and had a Triple Crown horse race named in his honour, and the Rothschilds, who had been buying up Confederate war bonds. Salman Rothschild said of a deceased President Lincoln, "He rejects all forms of compromise. He has the appearance of a peasant and can only tell barroom stories." I think you can gather who killed him then. And no, it wasn't the patsy. Baron Jacob Rothschild was equally flattering towards the US citizenry. He once commented to US Minister to Belgium, Henry Sanford, on the over 500,000 Americans who died during the Civil War. He said, "When your patient is desperately sick, you try desperate measures, even to bloodletting." Unquote. Salman and Jacob were merely carrying forth a family tradition. A few generations earlier, Mayor Amschel Rothschild bragged of his investment strategy, and he said, "When the streets of Paris are running in blood, I buy." Mayor Rothschild's sons were known as the Frankfurt Five. The eldest, Amschel, ran the family's Frankfurt Bank with his father, while Nathan ran London operations. Youngest son Jacob set up shop in Paris, while Salomon ran the Vienna branch and Karl was off to Naples. Author Frederick Morton estimates by 1850 the Rothschilds were worth over 10 billion. Some researchers believe their current fortune today exceeds 500 or 100 trillion. The Warburgs, Kuhn Loebs, Goldman Sachs, Schiffs and Rothschilds have all intermarried into one big happy banking family. The Warburg family, who controls Deutsche Bank and Bank Paribas, tied up with the Rothschilds in 1814 in Hamburg, while Kuhn Loeb powerhouse Jacob Schiff shared quarters with the Rothschilds in 1785. Schiff immigrated to America in 1865. He joined forces with Abram Kuhn and married Solomon Loeb's daughter. Edmund D. R. Loeb and Kuhn married each other's sisters, and the Kuhn-Loeb dynasty was consummated. Felix Warburg married Jacob Schiff's daughter. 2 Goldman daughters married 2 sons of the Sachs family, Creighton Goldman Sachs. In 1806, Nathan Rothschild married the oldest daughter of Levi Barrett Cohen, who was a leading financier in London. Merrill Lynch Super Bowl Abby Joseph Cohen and Clinton Secretary of Defense William Cohen are thus descendants of the Rothschilds. What a coincidence is that? Not. Hillary Clinton was a Rothschild. Bill Clinton is a Rockefeller. All the same inbreeding program of the royals, the pharaohs, and the Hebrew Anunnaki, where it all stems from. Today, the Rothschilds control a far-flung financial empire which includes majority stakes in most world central banks. The Edmund de Rothschild clan owns the Banque Privée South Africa, or SA, in Lugano, Switzerland, and the Rothschilds Bank AG of Zurich. The family of Jacob Lord Rothschild owns the powerful Rothschild Italia in Milan. They are members of the exclusive Club of the Isles, which provides capital for George Soros's Quantum Fund NV, which made a killing in 1998 and 1999, destroying the currencies of Thailand, Indonesia, and also Russia. Soros is a major shareholder of Harken Energy. Quantum NV handles 11 to 14 billion in assets and operates from the Dutch island of Curaçao, in the shadow of massive Royal Dutch Shell and Exxon Mobil refineries. Curaçao was recently cited by an OECD task force on money laundering as a major drug money laundering nation. The Club of Isles Group, which funds Quantum, is led by the Rothschilds and includes Queen Elizabeth II and other wealthy European aristocrats and also black nobility. Fugitive Swiss financier and Mossad cutout Mark Rich, whose business interests were recently taken over by the Russian mafia Alpha Group, is also part of the Soros network. Ties to drug money are nothing new to the Rothschilds. N.M. Rothschilds and Son was at the epicenter of the BCCI scandal, but escaped the limelight when a warehouse full of documents conveniently burnt to the ground around the time the Rothschilds-controlled Bank of England shut BCCI down. Yet again, a burning down of a building to hide evidence. The unreal, the amount of coincidences that happens, is it not? Perhaps the largest repository for Rothschild's wealth today is Rothschild's Continuation Holdings AG, a secretive Swiss-based bank holding company. By the late 1900s, scions of the Rothschilds' global empire were Barons Guy and Elie de Rothschilds in France, and also Lord Jacob and Sir Evelyn Rothschilds in Britain. Evelyn is also chairman of The Economist. Evelyn is male, despite having a girly name. The House of Orange-Nassau, Dutch, is the current reigning house of the Netherlands, a branch of the European House of Nassau, and the house has played a central role in the politics and government of the Netherlands and also Europe, especially since William the Silent organised the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule, after which the 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648, led to an independent Dutch state. Now, several members of the House served during this war after the stadtholder governor during the Dutch Republic. However, in 1815, after a long period as a republic, the Netherlands became a monarchy under the House of Orange-Nassau, which is around the same time in Vienna that the United States was formed. No, not America, Europe. The dynasty was established as a result of the marriage of Henry III of Nassau-Breda from Germany and Claudia of Chalon-Orange from French Burgundy in 1515. Their son René inherited in 1530 the independent and sovereign Principality of Orange from his mother's brother, Philibert of Chalon. As the first Nassau to be the Prince of Orange, René could have used Orange Nassau as his new family name. However, his uncle in his will had stipulated that René should continue the use of the name Chalon Orange, and so history knows him therefore as René of Chalon, but is actually Orange. After the death of René in 1544, his cousin William of Nassau-Dillenburg inherited all of his lands. This William I of Orange, in English better known as William the Silent, became the founder of the House of Orange-Nassau. The House of Nassau is listed in several countries, not just the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Luxembourg, Belgium, France, Germany, Orange, and also Nassau. A nobleman's power was often based on his ownership of vast tracts of land and lucrative offices. It also helped that much of the lands that the House of Orange-Nassau controlled sat under one of the commercial and mercantile centres of the world. This became possible. Nobleman's power, and was part of the UK Magna Carta, whereby lands that were owned by the kings was transferred in power and ownership to barons and nobles, or nobility, not we the people, as some espouse on the internet. The importance of the family grew through the 15th and 16th centuries as they became councillors, generals and stadholders of the Habsburgs. William of Orange, who many of the Irish wrongly blame today the British for the Battle of the Boyne, when it was the Dutch King's Army who did it, backed and funded by the Jewish money as referenced many times here and in other shows. And following marrying into British royalty, a common theme for power of that time, he ended up King of England, Scotland and Ireland at one point. But like I say, the title of Orange is not actually a Dutch title, but a French one, located in the old Occitan region, although residents there are trying to bring it back now as a separate municipality. Orenja is a commune in the Vaucluse department in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region in southeastern France, which is about 13 miles north of Avignon. And there you have it. The hidden secret empire of the Dutch, often portrayed as the British Empire, but that was an illusion. The Houses Empire is the real term, under the discrete banner of the House of Egypt and the House of Israel. Holland was used like every other country as a pawn in a much larger game too few even to this day are aware of. It continues to be the pawn of NATO and Rothschilds to this day, NATO being Rothschild's own private army. The Netherlands also houses all the main global courts, as mentioned earlier, none of which are beneficial to we the people. The political, financial aspect split the country in two between Holland and now Belgium, but that region was owned by the Hebrew-based Frankish Merovingians in the 5th century and then transferred to the equal Hebrew-based group, the Carolingians. In 1831, when Belgium was declared sovereign from Holland, but that was another illusion game, as we now all know. Until the start of the 12th century, the inhabitants of the area that became Holland were known as the Frisians, and the area was initially part of Frisia. Frisia was actually known as Magna Frisia in the 700s, long before another Magna came to fruition in the 1200s, known as the Magna Carta. Magna means large or great. Perhaps Carta is short for cartel. Cartel is the diminutive form of Carta. In 1432, Holland became part of the Burgundian Netherlands, and since 1477 of the Habsburgs' 17 provinces. The Habsburgs were another group who practiced inbreeding as well, so much so that they had conditions named after them. Numerous members of the family show specific facial deformities, an enlarged lower jaw with an extended chin known as mandibular prognathism or the Habsburg jaw, a large nose with a hump and hanging tip, very Jewish that, called the Habsburg nose, and everted lower lip, the Habsburg lip. The Dutch have played a prominent role in America's history as documented, and still have whole regions of North America with predominantly Dutch-speaking people, in particular Pennsylvania. Their roles in industry like oil, rail and transport networks were influenced by the Dutch-based families. The land of many windmills that produced many famous people like the Van Halen brothers, the De Boers, Van Gogh, Van Basten, Cruyff, Koeman and Frank Matahari and Adrian van den Berg of Whitesnake fame. And we celebrate many of the good things the Dutch people have brought to the world, including many in our own group THI Holland. And we wish them all a prosperous future, preferably without deep state clowns. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.